1993 marked a new chapter in Lennox Lewis's career, the moment the hunter became the hunted. Having been crowned WBC heavyweight champion after Riddick Bowe refused to face him, Lewis now stood at the summit of the heavyweight division. No longer the rising contender chasing his shot, he was now the man every challenger wanted to dethrone. This year would test not just his power and skill, but his ability to wear the crown. Fight 23. 8th May 1993. Thomas and Mack Center, Las Vegas. Lennox Lewis versus Tony Tucker. After Riddick Bowe infamously refused to face him and threw the WBC belt into the trash, Lennox Lewis was officially crowned WBC heavyweight champion. But he knew he still had to earn the respect that came with it. Now the hunter had become the hunted. His first defense, and true test as champion, came against the experienced Tony Tucker, who entered the ring with a formidable record of 48-1, his only defeat coming against Mike Tyson in 1987. Though Lewis had mentioned George Foreman as a possible opponent, he ultimately chose to face Tucker, the WBC's top-ranked contender. Tucker had once held the IBF world title before losing it to Tyson, and had since rebuilt his reputation with 14 consecutive wins. Yet despite his resume, the bookmakers made him a 6-1 underdog, expecting Lewis to dominate. From the opening round, Lewis dictated the fight with his powerful jab and superior reach. In round 3, he made history, dropping Tucker for the first time in his 50-fight professional career with a blistering right hand. Tucker showed toughness, surviving the knockdown and even managing to stun Lewis briefly in the 8th round with a wild 20-punch assault. But the champion quickly turned the tables, battering Tucker with heavy combinations to close the round. Early in the 9th, Lewis floored Tucker again with a thunderous right hook. Though Tucker survived to hear the final bell, it was a one-sided contest. The judges' scorecards read 118-111, 117-111, and 116-112, a clear unanimous decision victory for Lewis. This wasn't just a title defense. It was the moment Lennox Lewis truly became world champion. It also marked a historic milestone. The first time a European boxer had won a major heavyweight world title since Ingemar Johansson in 1959. Lewis had proven himself beyond controversy. The title was now undisputedly his, and the new era of heavyweight boxing had officially begun. Fight 24. 1st October 1993. National Stadium, Cardiff. Lennox Lewis versus Frank Bruno. In October 1993, the heavyweight crown came home, and for the first time in history, two British-born fighters would battle for the World Heavyweight Championship. The bout between Lennox Lewis and Frank Bruno wasn't just a title defense, it was a national event. Frank Bruno entered the ring with a record of 36-3 and a reputation as one of Britain's most beloved sportsmen. Twice before, he had fought for the world title, losing to Tim Witherspoon in 1986 at Wembley and Mike Tyson in 1989 in Las Vegas. Now, at 31, this was seen as Bruno's last chance to fulfill his lifelong dream. But there was tension in the build-up. Bruno questioned how British Lewis really was, pointing to his Canadian Olympic gold medal in 1988. The war of words added fuel to a rivalry that had the entire nation divided. Bruno or Lewis became the question on every fan's lips. When the opening bell rang in Cardiff, Bruno started aggressively, pushing Lewis onto the back foot. Lewis took the first round, but Bruno roared back in the second, using his jab and timing to disrupt the champion's rhythm. In the third, Bruno landed a heavy right hand that visibly shook Lewis, a moment that forced the champion to regroup and focus. "It didn't hurt me," Lewis later said, "but it got my attention." After 6 rounds, the fight was finally balanced. 2 judges had it level, while the third had Bruno ahead. But in the 7th round, everything changed. Bruno landed a quick left jab and pressed forward, but Lewis saw an opening. As Bruno dropped his right hand, Lewis unleashed a devastating left hook, staggering his opponent. Smelling blood, Lewis launched a ferocious barrage of punches, hammering Bruno with headshots until referee John Coyle Van stepped in. The fight was stopped 1 minute and 12 seconds into round 7. Lennox Lewis retained his WBC heavyweight title by technical knockout. It was a dramatic and emotional night, a proud all-British showdown that captured the hearts of millions. Lewis had silenced the critics who questioned his heritage and proved, beyond doubt, that he was Britain's true heavyweight king. Fight 25, May 6, 1994, Atlantic City, New Jersey. Lennox Lewis, WBC heavyweight title defense number 3, versus Phil Jackson. Following his impressive stoppage victory over Frank Bruno, Lennox Lewis looked set to unify the heavyweight division. Talks were underway for a blockbuster showdown with Evander Holyfield, who had just reclaimed the WBA and IBF titles from Riddick Bowe. But when Holyfield chose to step away from the sport, Lewis turned his attention to his next challenger, Phil Jackson, a little-known contender with an eye-catching record of 30 wins and just 1 defeat. Despite the numbers, Jackson's resume was thin. His only notable test had come against Donovan "Razor" Ruddock, who dominated and stopped him in 4 rounds back in 1992. Still, Jackson and his trainer Pat Burns insisted this time would be different, claiming improved preparation and focus would shock the world. But once the opening bell rang, Lewis made sure that prediction didn't last long. Within 30 seconds, Lewis landed a thunderous right hand that floored Jackson, immediately setting the tone. The British champion controlled the action from range, using his jab and power shots to systematically dismantle the overmatched challenger. Lewis scored another knockdown late in round 5 with a crisp straight right, and though Jackson bravely beat the count, he was in survival mode from that point onward. After 2 more rounds of one-sided punishment, Lewis closed the show in round 8, unleashing a vicious 4-punch combination that sent Jackson down for the 3rd time. Referee Arthur Mercante Sr. had seen enough, waving off the contest at 1:35 of the 8th round. It was another dominant performance for Lewis, who retained his WBC heavyweight championship for the 3rd time, and showcased the same frightening blend of patience, precision, and power that had carried him to the top of the division. But while 1994 started smoothly for the champion, few could have predicted the shocking twist that would soon follow, one that would send shockwaves through the heavyweight landscape and test Lennox Lewis like never before. Fight 26, September 24, 1994, Wembley Arena, London. Lennox Lewis, WBC heavyweight champion, versus Oliver McCall. After 3 successful but underwhelming defenses of his WBC heavyweight title, Lennox Lewis entered the autumn of 1994 on the verge of the biggest fight of his career. Negotiations were already complete for a record-breaking $31 million super fight with Riddick Bowe, a long-awaited clash between the 2 men who had met in the 1988 Olympic final. All that stood between Lewis and that career-defining showdown was a routine title defense against Oliver, the Atomic Bull, McCall. McCall, a former sparring partner for Mike Tyson, entered the bout with a modest 24-5 record and little fanfare. Most of his wins had come against journeymen, and his defeats included names like Orlin Norris, James "Buster" Douglas, and Tony Tucker. Yet, under Don King's guidance, McCall had strung together 5 consecutive wins to earn the WBC's #1 contender slot and his first shot at a world title. Lewis, however, paid little attention to his challenger. Confident and focused on the looming Bowe fight, he viewed McCall as a formality, a stay-busy bout to tick the mandatory box before moving on to bigger things. The opening round was quiet, with Lewis cautiously trying to establish his jab and range, while McCall looked composed and patient. 2 of the 3 judges gave Lewis the round, but McCall's stillness disguised his readiness. Then came the 2nd round, and with it, one of the great shocks in heavyweight history. As Lewis stepped in behind his right hand, McCall unleashed a perfectly timed counter right that detonated on Lewis's chin. The champion crashed to the canvas, stunned and struggling to regain his footing. He beat the count, but his legs were gone. Referee Jose Guadalupe Garcia continued to count, but when Lewis stumbled forward into him, the fight was waved off. Oliver McCall was the new WBC heavyweight champion by 2nd round TKO. The Wembley crowd was stunned into silence. Lewis, dazed and protesting, claimed the stoppage was early, but many at ringside, including Boxing Monthly editor Glenn Leach, agreed with the referee's call. noting that Lewis had only truly regained his senses after the fight had already been stopped. The loss sent shockwaves through the division. Lewis's planned $31 million clash with Riddick Bowe was immediately scrapped, and McCall, now aligned with Don King, rejected Lewis's $10 million offer for a rematch, setting his sights instead on defending the title against other King-managed fighters, particularly Mike Tyson, who was soon to be released from prison. For Lennox Lewis, the defeat was devastating. In one night, he lost not just his title, but his aura of invincibility and the biggest payday of his career. But it also marked a turning point. The loss would drive him to rebuild under the tutelage of Emanuel Steward, leading to one of the most remarkable comebacks in heavyweight history. 1994 ended not with triumph, but with a lesson, and the forging of the steel that would later make Lennox Lewis one of the greatest heavyweight champions of all time. 1997 marked a major turning point for Lennox Lewis, the year he clawed his way back to the top of the heavyweight division. After the controversy of 1996, Lewis was on a mission to prove he was still one of the elite, sharper, stronger, and now fully molded under the tutelage of the legendary Emanuel Steward. Over the course of 3 fights, Lewis would reclaim his former WBC title and deliver dominant performances that re-established him as a force to be feared. This was the year the rebuilding stopped, and the redemption truly began. Fight 31. February 7, 1997. Las Vegas, Nevada, versus Oliver McCall, 24-5. This was more than just a rematch. It was redemption night for Lennox Lewis. 2.5 years after suffering the first and only defeat of his professional career to Oliver McCall, Lewis finally had the chance to right the wrong and reclaim his position at the top. The stakes couldn't have been higher. The fight was for the vacant WBC Heavyweight Championship, a title left open after Mike Tyson chose to vacate the belt rather than face Lewis, his mandatory challenger. The road to this moment had been filled with frustration for Lewis. After rebuilding his career with wins over top contenders and becoming the WBC's #1 contender, he watched as Tyson, who had taken the title from Frank Bruno, opted to chase the WBA crown instead, leaving the WCB belt up for grabs. The sanctioning body ordered a showdown between its top 2 ranked heavyweights, Lewis and McCall. But McCall was no longer the same fighter who had stunned Lewis back in 1994. In the months leading up to the rematch, McCall's life had unraveled. He'd been arrested for disorderly conduct and sent to rehab for substance abuse. Despite concerns from Lewis's camp, promoter Don King insisted the fight go ahead. Once the bell rang, it quickly became clear that something was wrong. Lewis dominated behind his jab and right hand, while McCall barely threw punches, landing only 26 in the first 3 rounds. Then, in one of the most bizarre moments in boxing history, McCall simply stopped fighting. He dropped his hands, turned away from Lewis, and began walking aimlessly around the ring, at one point, even crying. Referee Mills Lane gave McCall every opportunity to continue, but when it became clear he had mentally checked out, Lane stopped the bout in the 5th round. Lennox Lewis was declared the winner by technical knockout, regaining the WBC heavyweight title and avenging his only career loss. Although the fight remains infamous for McCall's meltdown, it marked a pivotal turning point for Lewis. He was once again world champion, stronger, wiser, and ready to cement his legacy as one of the most complete heavyweights in history. Fight 32. July 12, 1997. Caesars Tahoe, State Line, Nevada, versus Henry Akinwande, 32-0-1. For his first defense of his second reign as WBC heavyweight champion, Lennox Lewis faced fellow Brit Henry Akinwande, an undefeated and towering opponent who, like Lewis, possessed elite size, reach, and technical skill. The matchup carried special significance, marking only the second all-British world heavyweight title fight in history, following Lewis's victory over Frank Bruno in 1993. Akinwande entered the bout as the reigning WBO heavyweight champion, but in order to face Lewis for the more prestigious WBC crown, he was forced to vacate his belt. The fight, originally scheduled for Atlantic City, had to be relocated to State Line, Nevada, after Akinwande's promoter, Don King, was banned from promoting in Atlantic City due to ongoing legal issues. What was expected to be a showcase of British boxing turned into one of the most frustrating heavyweight title fights of the decade. From the opening bell, Akinwande offered little in the way of offense, choosing instead to clinch Lewis repeatedly whenever the champion attempted to open up with his jab or right hand. Referee Mills Lane, who, just weeks earlier, had officiated the infamous Holyfield-Tyson bite fight, issued repeated warnings to Akinwande, eventually deducting a point in round 2 for excessive holding. However, Akinwande refused to change tactics, continuing to smother Lewis and grab onto him at every opportunity. Finally, after yet another long 19-second clinch in the 5th round, Mills Lane had seen enough. He disqualified Akinwande with 26 seconds remaining in the round, awarding Lewis the victory by disqualification and allowing him to retain his WBC title. The bout was met with disappointment and criticism, particularly toward Akinwande's lack of competitiveness. The Nevada Athletic Commission even withheld his $1 million purse pending review under new rules introduced after Tyson's disqualification, though it was later released in full. While the fight itself provided little drama in the ring, it nonetheless demonstrated Lewis's growing composure and control as champion. He had now defended his reclaimed crown, and his sights were firmly set on bigger challenges and greater unification. Fight 33, October 4th, 1997, Atlantic City, versus Andrew Golota, 28-2. For the second defense of his WBC heavyweight championship, Lennox Lewis faced the unpredictable and controversial Polish contender Andrew Golota, a talented fighter best known for his 2 infamous disqualification losses to Riddick Bowe. In both bouts, Golota had dominated the action, outboxing Bowe and leading on all scorecards before repeatedly landing low blows that caused the referee to stop the fights. Despite the controversy, Golota's skill and power had convinced many that he was one of the most dangerous heavyweights in the world. Originally, Golota was set to face Ray Mercer, but Mercer withdrew with a neck injury. Lewis quickly agreed to step in, setting up a fight that was expected to be a fierce, tactical battle between 2 of the division's elite. However, the night in Atlantic City would prove to be one of the most one-sided and explosive performances of Lewis's entire career. Before the bout, Lewis's manager Frank Maloney accused Golota of steroid use and demanded testing, but Golota passed clean. Once the bell rang, Lewis wasted no time establishing his dominance. From the opening seconds, he snapped Golota's head back with his powerful left jab and quickly forced him onto the defensive. Less than a minute into the fight, Lewis unleashed a devastating right hand that sent Golota staggering into the corner. Smelling blood, Lewis unleashed a 6-punch barrage, dropping Golota heavily to the canvas. Though Golota beat the count, he was clearly dazed and unsteady. Referee Joe Cortez allowed the fight to continue, but Lewis closed the show in ruthless fashion. A 10-punch combination crashed through Golota's guard, sending him down once more. This time, Cortez stepped in immediately, stopping the fight after just 95 seconds of total action. It was a stunning knockout, and one of the most emphatic statements of Lewis's career. The aftermath was as chaotic as the fight was brief. Golota, who had reportedly received a lidocaine injection before the bout to numb chronic knee pain, suffered a post-fight seizure in his locker room and temporarily lost his pulse before being resuscitated. He was rushed to hospital, but made a full recovery. For Lewis, it was a defining moment, a spectacular first-round knockout that reaffirmed his status as the most dominant heavyweight in the world and silenced any remaining doubts about his championship pedigree. 1998 saw Lennox Lewis continue to strengthen his grip on the heavyweight division. With 2 fights that year, Lewis aimed to reaffirm his dominance, silence any remaining doubts from his earlier career setbacks, and prove beyond question that he was the man to beat in boxing's most prestigious division. Fight 34, March 28, 1998, Atlantic City, USA, versus Shannon Briggs, 30-1. After a dominant first-round knockout victory over Andrew Golota, Lennox Lewis was set to defend his WBC heavyweight title against the outspoken and dangerous Shannon Briggs, who had controversially earned the shot after a disputed decision win over George Foreman. The bout also carried the distinction of the lineal heavyweight championship. making it one of the most anticipated fights of the year. Lewis started the fight using his trademark jab to control distance, but Briggs showed his power and aggression late in the first round, stunning Lewis with a flurry that had the crowd on their feet. In the second, Briggs again landed heavy shots that briefly wobbled the champion, but Lewis quickly steadied himself, reasserting control with superior technique and timing. From the third round onward, the tide turned completely. Lewis began to systematically break Briggs down, landing precise combinations and punishing power shots. In the fourth round, Lewis sent Briggs to the canvas twice with devastating right hands. The challenger bravely rose each time, but by the fifth round, Lewis was in full command. A thunderous right hand floored Briggs for a third time, and after one final barrage, referee Frank Cappuccino stepped in to stop the fight at 1:45 of round 5. Lewis retained his WBC crown and added the lineal heavyweight title with the victory, a commanding performance that showcased both his resilience under fire and his ruthless finishing ability. Fight 35, September 26, 1998, Mohegan Sun Casino, Uncasville, USA, versus Željko Mavrović, 27-0. With hopes of a unification clash against Evander Holyfield delayed due to Holyfield's mandatory defense, Lennox Lewis turned his attention to the undefeated Croatian contender, Željko Mavrović, the WBC's #1 challenger. Despite his spotless 27-0 record, Mavrović was largely untested at the elite level, prompting Lewis's trainer, Emanuel Steward, to remark, "He has one of the least impressive records I've seen. There's no important names on it." Once the bell rang, Lewis dominated behind his powerful jab and superior ring generalship, dictating the pace from start to finish. He landed a series of clean right hands and heavy combinations, but Mavrović displayed an iron chin, absorbing punishment and refusing to go down. The Croatian challenger's durability was remarkable. He appeared unfazed even as Lewis poured on the pressure and threw over 500 punches across 12 rounds. Though Mavrović showed heart and toughness, he never mounted any sustained offense, landing less than half of Lewis's output. After 12 one-sided rounds, the judges awarded Lewis a convincing unanimous decision, with scores of 119-109, 117-112, and 117-111. Lewis retained his WBC and lineal heavyweight titles with another dominant display, a fight that tested his conditioning and patience as much as his power, and set the stage for the long-awaited unification showdown with Evander Holyfield. 1999 would be the year that Lennox Lewis finally earned the recognition he truly deserved. After years of chasing respect and overcoming setbacks, Lewis entered the year determined to prove he was the undisputed best heavyweight of the 1990s. Across 2 defining fights, he showcased his brilliance, cementing his place at the very top of the division, and silencing any remaining doubters once and for all. Fight 36, March 13, 1999, Madison Square Garden, New York, versus Evander Holyfield, for the undisputed heavyweight championship, WBA, WBC, and IBF. After years of chasing the sport's ultimate prize, Lennox Lewis finally stepped into the ring for the undisputed heavyweight championship, facing the legendary Evander Holyfield at Madison Square Garden. Lewis entered the bout as the WBC champion, while Holyfield held the WBA and IBF titles, with the winner set to become boxing's first undisputed heavyweight king since 1992. In the build-up, Holyfield boldly predicted a third-round knockout, but it was Lewis who dominated from the opening bell, dictating the pace with his jab and superior boxing skills. Lewis outlanded Holyfield heavily, winning nearly every early round and leaving the crowd in awe of his composure and control. Holyfield had moments of aggression in the middle rounds, but Lewis quickly regained command, landing crisp combinations and stunning the American champion multiple times. By the final bell, most observers, including media and fans alike, had Lewis winning by a wide margin. However, the judges delivered one of the most infamous decisions in boxing history, a split draw. Scores of 116-113 for Lewis, 115-113 for Holyfield, and 115 to 115 left the heavyweight world in disbelief. The arena erupted in boos, and commentators labeled it a travesty. Though robbed of victory on paper, the performance elevated Lewis's reputation to new heights. He had proven, beyond doubt, that he was the best heavyweight in the world, setting the stage for the rematch that would define his legacy later that same year. Fight 37. November 13, 1999. Thomas and Mack Center, Las Vegas, Nevada, versus Evander Holyfield, undisputed heavyweight championship, WBA, WBC, IBF, and IBO. Following the outrage from their first encounter, Lennox Lewis and Evander Holyfield met again in one of the most highly anticipated rematches in modern boxing history. Their first fight ended in a scandalous split draw, a result that sent shockwaves through the sport. Demanding clarity, all three major sanctioning bodies ordered an immediate rematch, with both champions agreeing to an even split of the massive $30 million purse. Held exactly 7 years after Riddick Bowe had last unified the heavyweight titles, this rematch was set to crown the first undisputed heavyweight champion of the modern era. From the opening bell, Lewis fought with sharp focus and composure, using his superior reach and jab to dictate the pace. He controlled the early rounds, though Holyfield rallied in the middle stages, with bursts of aggression that reignited memories of his warrior spirit. The fight turned in Lewis's favor again in the later rounds, as his accuracy and stamina began to break down Holyfield's offense. The final rounds were fiercely contested, but Lewis closed strong, and when the scorecards were read, he was declared the unanimous decision winner, with scores of 115 to 113, 116 to 112, and 117 to 111. Lennox Lewis had finally achieved his lifelong dream, becoming the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, the first in 7 years. Though some still disputed the verdict as a make-good decision after the controversial draw, the result solidified Lewis's standing as the true king of the heavyweight division and the defining heavyweight of the 1990s. His reign as undisputed champion, however, would be short-lived. Within months, Lewis was stripped of the WBA title after refusing to face John Ruiz next, but by then, his legacy as the era's dominant heavyweight was already beyond question. As the new millennium began, Lennox Lewis stood alone at the top of the heavyweight mountain. The undisputed champion had silenced every critic and established himself as the era's defining force. In 2000, Lewis would further solidify his dominance and legacy with 3 more fights, each one reinforcing his position as the world's premier heavyweight. Fight 38, April 29, 2000, Madison Square Garden, New York, versus Michael Grant, 31-0. Contested for the WBC, IBF, and IBO heavyweight championships. After becoming the undisputed heavyweight champion, Lennox Lewis was contractually obligated to defend his titles against the WBA's top contender, originally Henry Akinwande, later replaced by John Ruiz. However, Lewis instead chose to face the undefeated American powerhouse Michael Grant, a rising star with a perfect 31-0 record who many believed could be the next great heavyweight. The decision would cost Lewis his WBA title after Don King's legal intervention, but the champion was determined to make a statement in the ring. Grant started aggressively, looking to use his size and power to pressure Lewis, but it quickly unraveled. Midway through the first round, Lewis landed a thunderous right hand that sent Grant crashing to the canvas. The challenger beat the count but was visibly shaken, and Lewis immediately unleashed another furious barrage. A second knockdown followed, and then, with just seconds left in the round, Lewis floored Grant again with a devastating left-right combination. Though Grant survived the round, he was barely standing. Lewis began the second round hunting for the finish, and with 23 seconds remaining, a brutal right uppercut ended the contest emphatically. Grant struggled to rise but couldn't beat the count, giving Lennox Lewis a stunning second-round knockout victory. This performance cemented Lewis's dominance as the true king of the heavyweight division, a ruthless champion dismantling an undefeated challenger in spectacular fashion at Madison Square Garden. Fight 39, July 15, 2000. London Arena, London, versus Franz Botha. 40 wins, 2 defeats, 1 draw. Contested for the WBC, IBF, and IBO heavyweight championships. After demolishing Michael Grant in New York, Lennox Lewis returned to London for a homecoming title defense against Franz Botha, the WBC's number 9 ranked contender. Botha had gained respect after a strong showing against Mike Tyson, dominating 4 rounds before being stopped, and followed it with a draw against Shannon Briggs and a first-round knockout over Steve Pinnell. Despite this, Lewis faced criticism for choosing an opponent ranked outside the IBF top 10. Botha, ever confident, declared, "If I don't knock him out, it's going to be a terrible beating." But it was Lewis who delivered the beating. From the opening bell, the champion controlled the fight with precision and power, landing 24 of his 47 punches, while Botha could only manage 9. Late in the first round, a heavy right hook staggered Botha, but he barely survived as Lewis pressed forward relentlessly. In round 2, Botha tried to stay on the move, but Lewis continued to stalk him. With just 40 seconds left in the round, Lewis unleashed a brutal 4-punch combination that sent Botha halfway through the ropes. Though Botha courageously climbed back into the ring, referee Larry O'Connell had seen enough and waved it off, giving Lewis another devastating second-round knockout victory. After the fight, Lewis addressed Mike Tyson's taunts following his win over Lou Savarese, firing back, "Tell Mike Tyson to either put up or shut up. He's been talking about what he can eat. I'll show him what he can eat," raising his right fist to the cheers of the London crowd. It was another dominant and emphatic statement from the reigning champion. Lennox Lewis was leaving no doubt who ruled the heavyweight division. Fight 40, November 11, 2000. Mandalay Bay Resort and Casino, Las Vegas, versus David Tua, 37-1. Contested for the WBC, IBF, and IBO heavyweight championships. After dispatching Franz Botha in brutal fashion, Lennox Lewis turned his attention to his next mandatory challenger, the dangerous Samoan powerhouse David Tua, ranked number 1 by both the WBC and IBF. Initially, Lewis hoped to stage the bout in his boyhood home of Toronto, Canada, but promotional and logistical changes saw the fight land at the Mandalay Bay Resort and Casino in Las Vegas. Tua entered the ring with an impressive record of 37 wins and only 1 defeat, having already claimed victories over future world champions John Ruiz, Oleg Moskayev, and Hasim Rahman. Known for his devastating left hook and granite chin, Tua confidently predicted an upset, dismissing Lewis as a lazy fighter with a suspect chin. He promised to knock out the champion and claim the throne for himself, but when the bell rang, it was all Lennox Lewis. Using his trademark jab and superior reach, Lewis kept Tua at bay from the very first round, landing a crisp right hook that reportedly cracked one of Tua's ribs. Despite Tua's trademark aggression, he could never close the distance on the taller, sharper Lewis. The champion completely neutralized Tua's offense, dictating the pace and outlanding him 300 punches to 110, while throwing over 670 punches across 12 one-sided rounds. There were no knockdowns, but Lewis's dominance was absolute. The scorecards told the story: 119 to 109, 118 to 110, and 117 to 111, all in favor of Lewis, who retained his titles by unanimous decision in one of the most disciplined performances of his career. After the fight, a confident Lewis turned his attention to the one man the world wanted to see him face, Mike Tyson. "If Tyson wants to come to test, I'll put him to rest. Lennox Lewis is the best." Manager Frank Maloney echoed the sentiment, saying Lewis deserves the big fight, pointing out how he'd been denied showdowns with Riddick Bowe and Michael Moorer in years past. With his decisive win over Tua, Lennox Lewis closed out the year 2000 as the undisputed king of the heavyweight division, the man who stood alone atop the mountain. As the new millennium rolled on, Lennox Lewis stood alone at the summit of the heavyweight division, respected, feared, and firmly established as the era's defining champion. But between 2001 and 2003, Lewis would face the final, and perhaps most dangerous, tests of his legacy. In just 4 fights, he would conquer a feared knockout artist, suffer one of the biggest upsets in boxing history, orchestrate a dramatic revenge mission, and survive a brutal war that convinced him it was time to walk away. These were the years that cemented his place among the greatest heavyweights ever, and the battles that nearly shattered it. This is the final chapter of Lennox Lewis's legendary career. Fight 41, 22nd April 2001, Brakpan, South Africa, versus Hasim Rahman, 34-2. Following 3 successful title defenses in 2000, Lennox Lewis entered 2001 with his sights firmly set on the super fight the boxing world had long demanded, a showdown with Mike Tyson. Lewis expected that bout to happen in the summer of 2001, but Tyson's 3-month suspension for testing positive for marijuana after the Andrew Golota fight put negotiations on hold. As Lewis waited for Tyson and even entertained a possible unification clash with WBA champion John Ruiz, he accepted a mandatory defense against relatively unheralded contender Hasim Rahman. Lewis came in as an overwhelming 20-1 favorite, but his preparation was widely criticized. While Rahman arrived in South Africa on March 27th to properly acclimate to Brakpan's 5,200-foot altitude, Lewis didn't land until April 10th. Instead of training at elevation, he chose to remain in Las Vegas, just 2,000 feet above sea level, so he could simultaneously film cameo scenes for the Hollywood movie Ocean's 11. On top of the altitude complications, the fight itself was scheduled for 5 a.m. local time, to suit HBO's US broadcast window, adding another unusual wrinkle to Lewis's preparation. Despite these factors, Lewis started the fight well. After a competitive opening round, he swept rounds 2 through 4 on all 3 scorecards, establishing a 39-37 lead. Rahman, however, had quietly begun to shift the momentum. By round 4, he was the aggressor, throwing 60 punches to Lewis's 33, matching him blow for blow and showing the confidence of a man who believed he belonged. Round 5 would change heavyweight history. Lewis spent most of the round stalking Rahman, throwing few punches as he searched for a single knockout shot, but Rahman remained composed, avoiding Lewis's power and slowly pushing him backward behind a stiff jab. With 46 seconds left in the round, Rahman backed Lewis into the ropes, and then came the moment that stunned the world. Lewis briefly dropped his hands, just for a second, and Rahman instantly launched a thunderous right hand that detonated cleanly on Lewis's jaw. Lewis crashed to the canvas, badly hurt, and struggled desperately to rise, but he could not beat the count. In one of boxing's greatest upsets, Hasim Rahman scored the knockout and became the new heavyweight champion of the world. It was a shocking end to one of the most surprising nights of the modern heavyweight era, and the beginning of a rivalry that would demand an immediate and dramatic conclusion later that year. Fight 42, 17th November 2001, Las Vegas, versus Hasim Rahman, 35-2. After suffering a shocking knockout defeat to Hasim Rahman earlier in the year, Lennox Lewis activated the rematch clause written into their first contract. Rahman, now aligned with Don King, explored several lucrative options following his title win. Showtime offered him over $19 million to face Mike Tyson, while HBO countered with a $17 million offer for an immediate rematch with Lewis. Rahman rejected both proposals, instead choosing a lower-risk bout against David Izon for $5 million. Lewis took the matter to court, and in June, a judge ruled in his favor, legally enforcing the rematch for November 17th in Las Vegas. Unlike their first meeting in South Africa, Lewis entered this fight fully focused, properly conditioned, and determined to reclaim his belts. From the opening bell, he imposed his authority, working behind a sharp, disciplined jab that immediately began controlling the distance and tempo. Lewis opened a cut over Rahman's left eye in the first round and dominated the early action, sweeping all 3 rounds on every judge's scorecard. Midway through the 4th round, Lewis found the decisive opening. He unleashed a perfectly timed left-right combination that crashed squarely onto Rahman's chin, sending the defending champion heavily to the canvas. Rahman attempted to rise, but fell back down at the count of 9, unable to continue. Lennox Lewis was declared the winner by knockout, emphatically avenging the upset and regaining his heavyweight championship. Fight 43, 8th June 2002, Memphis, vs. Mike Tyson, 49-3. The long-delayed Lewis-Tyson showdown was finally set for Memphis after Nevada and several other states refused to license Tyson, largely due to the infamous press conference brawl earlier that year. With global anticipation at an all-time high, the two men entered the ring in front of a huge worldwide audience for a fight that had been nearly a decade in the making. Once the action began, it quickly became clear that the years of chaos surrounding Tyson had taken their toll, while Lewis arrived sharp, focused, and intent on making a statement. Tyson started strongly, charging forward with the aggression of old, but Lewis kept him at distance with a stiff, punishing jab and perfectly timed uppercuts. As the rounds progressed, Lewis's superior size, conditioning, and technical command took over. Tyson's face began to swell and cut under the constant impact, and his output diminished as Lewis systematically broke him down. By the middle rounds, Lewis was in full control, measuring Tyson, walking him into huge right hands, and sapping whatever remained of Tyson's resistance. In the 8th round, after absorbing a series of heavy shots, Tyson was floored twice. The second knockdown left him on his back as the referee completed the count. Lennox Lewis won by emphatic knockout, not only dominating his most famous rival, but reinforcing his status as the true heavyweight king of the era. Fight 44, 21st June 2003, Staples Center, Los Angeles, versus Vitali Klitschko, 32-1. After knocking out Mike Tyson, Lennox Lewis took a year away from the ring, during which he vacated the IBF title and navigated a chaotic landscape of failed negotiations and shifting opponents. What was supposed to be a tune-up bout against Kirk Johnson collapsed when Johnson withdrew injured, leading Lewis and WBC mandatory challenger Vitali Klitschko to agree to meet far earlier than originally planned. Though not the lucrative Tyson rematch Lewis had pursued, it became one of the most dramatic heavyweight fights of the era. Klitschko entered as the underdog, but immediately proved his legitimacy, starting fast and dominating the opening rounds with aggression, heavy right hands, and constant pressure. He stunned Lewis early and opened a cut under the champion's left eye, winning the first 2 rounds convincingly. But in the third, Lewis responded like a champion, driving home a huge right hand that ripped open a deep cut above Klitschko's left eye. From that point on, the fight became a brutal, exhausting war of attrition. Both men traded powerful jabs, uppercuts, and looping rights in a ferocious battle that left them visibly drained. Klitschko fought through the worsening damage around his eye, and even regained momentum in the 4th, while Lewis turned the tide again with heavy inside shots and a savage uppercut in the 6th round that further compromised Klitschko's vision. By the end of the 6th, the challenger's left eye had become a horrific gash, prompting the ringside doctor to stop the fight before the 7th round could begin. Lewis was declared the winner by technical knockout, though Klitschko led 58-56 on all 3 judges' scorecards at the time of the stoppage. The result sparked immediate calls for a rematch, and Lewis initially showed interest. But after Klitschko defeated Kirk Johnson to officially re-earn his shot, Lewis chose not to fight again in 2003, and ultimately announced his retirement in February 2004. The Klitschko fight would stand as the final chapter of his career. One last war, one last victory, and one more reminder of his toughness, power, and championship resolve.